All right, good evening. Welcome to the Neary Building Committee meeting. It is Tuesday, January 9th, 2024. It is 6:34 p.m. And we have 6 of our 7 voting members right this second. And Denise was here and left the room, was having some audio issues. So I do expect she'll be back. We also have a number of our ex officio members. Welcome and thank you for joining. It's been a long time since the full committee's been together. And we have a lot ahead of us tonight, but a lot of positive updates to hopefully move the project forward and start doing some work. The first action item is the approval of meeting minutes from October 30th of 2023. Those minutes were circulated. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing and hearing none, I'll make a motion to approve them as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Chris?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Roger?
Aye.
And I am aye as well. So that is a 6-0 vote. The next is the review and vote on the Arrow Street designer contract. I will bring over our OPM team now, but I just wanted to, while I bring them over, extend my deepest gratitude to both our voting and non-voting members that participated on the designer selection subcommittee. I don't know any of you that were following the meetings that were occurring that led up to ultimately the MSBA vote, before the holidays, but there was a lot of work that went into that, and just a huge thank you to the team for everything that they did to kind of keep that process moving on time, and also the thought that went into everything that they were doing. Roger, you have your hand up.
Just a procedural question. I think I put this in an email somewhere. Because the subcommittees, at least the designer selection subcommittee, has a quorum, even though this isn't our business, do we need to call this subcommittee to order? Okay.
No, you're part of a full committee, because all the subcommittees have quorums right now.
Got
So when
it.
the full building committee meets, only the full committee posts. That's typically how we do it. If you think about it from a school committee perspective, Roger, Greg would have to post for every subcommittee every time your full school committee met, as an example.
Understood. Thank you.
So, but no, thank you for trying to, I think that stuff's important. So, Jim, I think I missed Dale. Hang on. All right. I think I got everyone now, Jim. So I'll turn it over to you just to give a brief overview of the process to get to the MSBA. I think just a couple of minutes on what you did with the designer selection subcommittee is important. How the MSBA discussions actually went. We're obviously aware of the vote related to Arrow Street, then what you've done since that MSBA meeting, and then what the action is that you're requesting of the committee tonight.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And definitely echo all Jason's sentiments for all the hard work of the subcommittee and the members that sat in on the designer selection panel as well. It's definitely a good, thoughtful process. So to that end, to what Jason mentioned, we received RFS responses from 4 firms. We reviewed those in detail, both Skanska and then with the designer selection subcommittee. We went through, checked references. We went to the designer selection panel on December 5th. So the designer selection panel, the MSBA process, the MSBA designer selection panel selects all designers for their projects, their funded projects. So it's a 16-member panel representing all different factions of both the MSBA and the public. Three of those members are required to be from the districts. So Mark Purple, Roger Challen, and Superintendent Martineau were all members of that panel. So they get 3 votes out of the 16. So as I said, on December 5th, we met with the designer selection panel. They reviewed just the RFSs. They decided to move forward with 3 firms to interviews on December 19th. At that meeting, all 3 firms definitely gave very strong interviews. I think they made good cases for each of them, and I think all firms were very well qualified. Came down to what the best fit for the district was. So ultimately, Arrow Street was the top ranked firm. So with that, we had the authorization to proceed with fee negotiations with Arrow Street. So obviously that's what's been happening over the last couple of weeks. I guess I can stop there. And are there any questions? That was kind of a very quick overview of the process of how we got here. Are there any questions on that process? Okay.
You have one, Kathy. Go ahead.
So, Jim, I had, I think, asked Andrew, Jason previously, who were going to be the ones that negotiated the contract we have in front of us tonight. And I think his answer was he wasn't quite sure at that point. So how did that get determined, and who was the group to sit down with Arrow Street?
So as OPM, that's one of our duties, to sit down and negotiate the fee with them, and basically make sure that all the requirements within the all the feasibility study are within their proposal, and negotiate that fee to within our budget. So that was performed by us. Okay. All right, so with that, I will share my screen.
Hang on one second. You may need.
Oh, yeah.
Is there anyone else in your team that's going to need share privileges, Jim?
It should just be me.
Okay. 1 second. All right, you should be all set, Jim.
Yep. All right. So just as a reminder, this was the feasibility study budget that was voted on at town meeting. So what we are reviewing tonight is the designer's basic services. So that's all of their major. That's the architectural, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing. We have a separate budget for environmental, site, and testing. So that's separate from this. That will procure those as we go through the feasibility study. But the designer basic services budget within the project's feasibility study budget is $600,000. So one of the first things we did was we basically benchmarked where the fee was. So the budget was $600,000. The Arrow Street's proposal after negotiations came in at $596,000. So this graph is basically a range of this document that the MSBA issues. This is for MSBA funded projects, specifically elementary schools, and they give percentages of what those fees are for each, and including feasibility. So in that percentage is based on estimated construction cost. So within the RFP that we issued out, our construction range based on enrollment, and this is a very early number, just want to make sure that that's clear, was 75 to 100 million based on our enrollment. So taking the median of that, a rough construction cost of 87.5 million. The percentage of construction cost that the fee is 0.68%. So the feasibility study average for MSBA projects is 1.36%. So we're below that, but we're within the range of that benchmark data that MSBA supplies. So we were comfortable with where we were landing as far as compared to other projects and the current market for where fee is for designers. So I guess any questions on the benchmarking itself? Okay. All right. So when we got to the 596,000, obviously that's within our budget. We're right up against our budget, but we're comfortable with what's in there. The next thing was in the meeting materials, we issued their proposal. We also went through that to make sure that everything that is required as part of the feasibility study and schematic design is included within their proposal, and we were comfortable with that as well. We did have a few comments back and forth, a few adjustments to things, but ultimately the proposal that was included in the material, the meeting materials, we're comfortable recommending approval tonight for the proposal from Arrow Street in the amount of 596,000.
Jim, is there anything else you're going to want to cover before we take questions
Nope.
on the proposal itself?
Nope.
Okay.
That should be obviously lots of information in the proposal. So if there's any specific questions on any of the items within the proposal, happy to field those.
Okay. Kathy, I saw your hand was up.
So I can wait, Jason. I took it back down when I heard we're going to get to questions, so I can wait to see
Okay.
what's down to speed 7 to ask questions.
Sounds like you're ready for questions though, Jim, right?
Yeah,
This one?
definitely.
Okay. Because we're not going to go line by line through the proposal. Obviously, that was provided as a pre-read for everyone. So Kathy, I'd go with whatever questions you have.
All right, so obviously the 596 is not a coincidence that it's right against the 600. They must have at some point known what our budget was.
Yeah, I think that there's always line of sight to that. But again, reviewing that against the benchmark data, I think we're comfortable where we are.
But it's exactly half. If you buy the 75 to 100 million, it's exactly half of the averages. Why? It just looks low. I'm glad it's low. I'm glad it's within our what we had approved, but it looks low. So then that leads me to, where did they get the 75 to 100 million? Who came up with 75 to 100? It just looks like it's too small of a range to me.
So that's based on the projected enrollment that was included of the 300 to 600. So that was what we put in the request for proposal. So we take that data based on enrollment, current data, and that's how we got to the 75 to 100 million, strictly based on enrollment, on projected enrollment. So that's how we got that 75 to 100. Obviously, there's a lot of information to be had yet that'll inform that number, but at that time, that's the best educated range that we could put in for the RFS.
So the 75 is the 305, the lowest enrollment for Neary, and the 100 is the highest enrollment when you put the 4 grades there?
Correct.
Okay, that's my questions.
And I think just for sake of clarity, just to make sure everyone's working on the same page, these numbers are both new construction numbers, Jim, right? Again, very,
Yes.
very, very preliminary, right? But
Correct.
we are going to still have to study, and I believe all of the designers had to make pitches as part of their interviews to the MSBA, renovation and or, right? Like there were some expansion plans. So Kathy, I think it's important to note that obviously we end up that renovation is the path for whatever reason as part of the feasibility study. That 75 will come lower for obvious reasons. Our percentage will go up, but we're likely, even if we jumped kind of to in the way I would at least think about it, Jim, keep me honest on this, even if our percentage jumped to the far side because our construction costs went down, it's still money well spent because it's informing what's the most cost-effective way to solve for our educational needs, as we move forward. That would be vetted through a year-plus long process.
Yeah,
But if
yeah,
you face it, I think the fee is excellent. I'm not complaining about the fee at all for what we're going to get out of it and all the different permutations we're going to look at. But to me, it's a lot. It's a lot they're going to be doing to earn their five. So I think they're going to certainly earn their money with all we're asking to do. It just seems low for
Yeah.
what we're asking them to do. That's my point. I don't want to raise, but it just seems low. And when we came up with the 900 or 950, whatever it is, if my memory is correct, it was a little arbitrary at that point. And so therefore the fact that it came in, right at the number is good. Let me just say that. It's good.
Go ahead, Chris.
I think Jason and the group after, I was looking at the comps earlier today, and if you went to a school with similar enrollment, and then you look at the construction date and the starts for, obviously inflation, there's been an uptick. You look at some of the projects in 21 and 22, I'm looking at Fitchburg, 845 student enrollment, 115,000 square foot new construction project. That's at 49, and then you take another comp that was from July, that was March of 23, so that was recent. But then you can go back to 21 and look at.
Chris, you muted yourself somehow as you were talking.
Oh, sorry. Just the comp shakeout, pretty close when you're looking at some of the comparisons, and they're a couple of years back too. So, which obviously the cost has gone up on materials and building and designer fees and everything the last couple of years.
Okay, Andrew.
Jim, quick question. In the budget, we had the engineering and testing, like 100,000, 50 for other. I see in the contract, none of that testing is included. Traffic, site survey, environmental. Are we comfortable that will cover that extra portion?
yeah. So we've started to talk about that as part of our negotiations with them. That's our budget for those services. So yeah. So as of right now, yeah, we're comfortable with that 100,000.
150, just to make sure we're talking right. Site testing, and I call it other, which would be, I guess you could call it contingency. So we basically will have 150 that's not spoken for at the end if we are to vote this tonight, correct?
Although
So
we use some of the other for the OPM though, right?
It is.
Some
Yeah.
of the 200. 200 for the
Yeah, so some of this was when we negotiated our fee, was moved up to the 200.
Right. But also, just full disclosure, right? You're on a rates and hours contract, right? So there may be things that, we may not use all the hours as well. Right. Again, your total sum based on your budget is greater than 200K at this point.
Yeah, potentially. Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, let me just ask a question for clarification. As I went through their design proposal, I have probably 3 pages of notes of things that should be done that I don't see in there. And I'm just raising the red flag that perhaps we should define what is in that other engineering and what those numbers are. Ultimately, the concern I have is some of these identified things that I see have to be done. And I don't want it left that it becomes an issue. Do we spend it or not spend it? they have to be done. So I think we need some definition to that additional 100,000 because I'm one that's not convinced it's enough money.
So yeah, so they've already started the process of procuring numbers for what's defined as reimbursable services over and above the basic services. What we're discussing tonight is just the basic services. So we'll have to come back to this group with that in order to vote that, and we can loop you in as well as far as what's included within that. But the contract that we will sign with them is the MSBA contract that includes all the pieces and parts of the feasibility study. So there's, which is we can obviously share that once that's complete and executed. But all the pieces and parts required for Arrow Street to perform the feasibility study and schematic design are all included within that contract, and that's what we'll sign based on this fee. So we can share that with you.
How does that relate to the January 5th letter that we have, where they're outlining all of the items that they're expected to do? Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah. So between their proposal and the MSBA contract, those are all the services that they will provide.
Okay.
So let me just try to thread a needle here. So I think it's important to remember this is feasibility, Mark. So there will be essentially, if there is a successful town meeting vote to move forward the project after all the necessary MSBA approvals in place, what I wonder is whether some of the items on your list are from a future phase. So I'm like, but you're basically saying that your list is things that you would like to see before this went to a vote at town meeting. Is that what you're saying?
I envision what I've listed here, and I can quickly go through some of them, are legitimate items that should be done in a feasibility study.
Okay. And Jim, what you're saying is that the items that Arrow Street has quoted follows what I'll call the textbook approach that MSBA requires us to use for a feasibility. Doesn't include anything more, doesn't include anything less.
Yes, yeah, and what's typically expected of them for feasibility studies that they've performed previously as well with success.
Okay, so before I go to Andrew and Kathy, one final comment to kind of just try to tease out. Mark, I'm going to come back to you, but I want to kind of see what Andrew and Kathy have. Let's just say Marcus' hunch is that these additional services, we don't have the money. We won't have the money left to perform all the things that may be required. What happens if we let's just say approve this contract tonight? We already know kind of what your number is. We have a finite amount of funding from town meeting. I don't believe that's an option to go back for additional feasibility money. So what happens? Obviously, this is a gross number. We're expecting a match back from MSBA, so the town ultimately will not spend $950 on feasibility as part of our agreement with MSBA. But just has this happened with other MSBA projects before? Are things punted because there's no funding, or is stuff done kind of on a contingency basis that like it happens up front, but the billing is then recuperated in a construction phase? Or just walk us through kind of the not a doomsday approach, but like an approach where we've exhausted our funds.
So what I'll say is that a firm such as Arrow Street, who has performed MSBA projects in the past, they understand what's required. And what's included in the budget is and we had this discussion that it's adequate for them to perform a thoughtful and successful feasibility study. So I have not run into in the past that we exhaust all feasibility studies or all feasibility study funds and are not able to complete the process. They understand what the process is as required by MSBA and also the districts. You know, and I think the budget that we have and the contract that we're going to negotiate will provide the district with a full and complete feasibility study.
Thank you. Andrew?
So Jim, I see in here, there's a lot of time spent with the committee, with the school district leadership, but there's only one community forum. And I think with this being the largest project this town has ever done, I think that's light in terms of the communication. I don't know what the communication committee would think about that, but I think that just seems light in terms of pre-town meeting community forums for this kind of a project.
Yeah, so I actually brought this up with them. And that's one for the overall visioning process. They understand that there's going to be multiple open forums as we walk through options. And I believe they added that language further down in the proposal. I'd have to find it, but that was one of my first comments as well, because that jumped out at me when we were walking through the reviewing the proposal. So I had that discussion with Arrow Street and they do understand. And I can find I believe they added it back in that
Okay.
they understand that there'll be multiple.
All right.
You good, Andrew, for now?
Yep.
Go ahead, Kathy.
So back to this slide, as far as the concern on whether there's enough money to do the ancillary services that Mark's worried about. Jason, am I incorrect? The 38% we're going to get back of this, doesn't that go back into this? We really have a cushion of 150 after this and after the OPM estimate. There's another 300 something thousand bucks that we would have available to pay for these. I mean, if I remember the Warren article, it didn't talk about the reimbursement having to be netted. It just said 950, period.
I will, if Becky, Greg, or Jim know the answer to this, or anyone on the Skanska team, my understanding was our requirement was to provide our gross budget to town meeting and assume no reimbursement. So my understanding all along has been that we cannot use any of that reimbursement, just like when we did the boiler at Finn. I see Greg's nodding his head, but I don't know if Greg or Becky have a affirmative to that.
That is accurate, Jason.
All right, so our budget really is 950.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then
Go ahead, Kathy.
Second, so this is why I'm confused. So I thought what we were looking at tonight, that Lawrence phone has already, I don't have my glasses on. Lawrence has already signed. That is the contract. So you say, no, we sign that we agree to everything in it, and then the MSBA itself signs the actual contract with Arrow Street?
No, so sorry for that. No, there's a MSBA standard contract that the district will sign. So the district and the design team will sign it. It's their standard contract for feasibility study and schematic design, but the district signs it.
Okay, so this letter we're looking at, which is quite lengthy itself, is going to be incorporated into that contract?
Correct.
And Mark would be the ultimate signer on behalf of the town of Southborough, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Andrew, to answer your question, 6F as in Frank, I think more than covers your concern about community engagement in forums. Greg, you've been patiently waiting.
So just a quick question follow-up for Mark Davis. If Mark can just elaborate on some of the items that he feels are not included in the document and the draft. I'd just be curious to get a better understanding of what some of those items are.
So Mark, why don't you give a few examples and then we'll let the Skanska team react to it.
Sure. Overriding. Suppose we get into this and 5 months from now, we find that this site is not feasible for a school. of any size. What do we do? Are we obligated to complete this contract, or are we renegotiating because we need a different site?
So as part of the MSBA process, we do have to look at alternate sites. That's a requirement. So that would be part of the feasibility study, to see if there are any alternate sites within the district. Obviously, that's limited within the district. We do understand that, but that's part of the feasibility study.
Okay, and to get into some specifics, um, uh, generally there's one town organization that isn't listed there that shouldn't be in the other category, which is the Board of Health. Um, we need to list them as a group that we're going to consult with, not only for septic issues and septic capacities, but for any investigations that they've had over the years on the location of the landfill. Um, Arrow Street doesn't have it in their mapping. And granted, it's an overview of what the site is. My biggest issue is the status of that landfill, which is under that soccer field. And there needs to be some money set aside so that we know what the extent of that landfill is and how it impacts this site. As I understand it, we cap the top, but we've done very little other than that, other than annual testing, which I assume has been done. We've listed soil sampling, but we haven't gone beyond that to determine what's going on in the groundwater. And ultimately, that's a huge concern for me. If there's nothing in the groundwater, then we've had a successful 50-year run. But we need to know what this site is going to look like 50 years from now, because we're investing in a building that's going to be that old. So if we find there is effluent in there and we don't try to get some scientific knowledge as to what this site will look like 20 years, 30 years, 40 years out, because we're going to have kids in these schools all of those days. We need to have some dedicated funding to determine the impact of that. I guess in a odd sense, it was an active landfill when this school was built. And it frightens the devil out of me that we haven't had any issues down there. So I really think it's an item that needs to have a dedicated line item too. All the other issues are really pinpointing where these wetlands are, making sure they're flagged properly. The groundwater issue in the rear of the building is a significant issue, and we need to upfront deal with that so that we know just what's going on there. I think those are the biggest ones. And I just am uncomfortable without a definition of those and what that cost will be, because it potentially could be a significant impact to us.
So just to go back, I mean, Board of Health, as far as your geoenvironmental, site testing, septic, all of that, I think definitely as we go through the feasibility study, that'll be a major piece of it. And I think that's standard operating procedure for the designers as well as their subconsultants. I think as far as the soils testing, it's always kind of a fine line of how much do you want to do pre design development during feasibility. But I think if there's specific concerns, we can fit that within the budget that we have. So I definitely think that is, making sure that we're getting as much information through the feasibility study to inform the options. Ultimately, what we're going to work through is developing options and understanding what the benefits and risks of each of those are. So I definitely think the subsurface soil conditions will be a piece of that. You can't do a full-blown investigation until design development, as you know, Jason alluded to. But I definitely think if there's specific areas of concern that those can be focused on.
Okay,
Anything else, Mark, for now?
for now, that's fine.
Okay, so Jim, I assume there wouldn't be an objection if we added the words Board of Health into this document. I mean, they obviously need to go through them as a permitting agency, but I know I hope that would be a step in the right direction to kind of ease some of Mark's concerns.
Yeah, that's not a problem. Yep.
Okay. Dale, your hand was up for a long time and then suddenly went down. We can't hear you. I'll go to Kathy and come back to you while you work on your microphone. Go ahead, Kathy.
So Mark, I think what you just said is actually really important. I hadn't focused on landfill. Jim Burrows, did you know there's a landfill underneath that field?
Yes. Yep.
And does that mean that Errol Street knows that also?
I would have to check with them. I believe that was as part of their discovery. I'm sure they did, but I mean, that's the process that we're entering into so that we have all the information.
I think you should overtly ask them if they know that to make sure that that's been considered. And maybe in addition to what Jason's proposed to add Board of Health overtly, which I agree with, also under the supplemental services, either put in parentheses next to geo environmental or separate line item investigation of the landfill. And I agree with Mark that $100,000 looks light to do all these things. So we've got ways to deal with it. I think if it goes over, we could appropriate the money coming back from SBA specifically. So I'm not worried about finding the money if it goes over, but I do think this is extremely important to make sure this has been covered. And then lastly, are we really going to spend a full-throated effort to find 2 other locations? Or do we just have to list 2 other places to satisfy MSBA, knowing that this is the more likely location? I can't think of 2 other places that Greg is going to come up with here.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously this comes up in a lot of districts that there really is no other spot for it. We do need to make the effort to look into it, and Arrow Street understands that. They've done it in other districts. And if there are no other areas, here are the reasons why, and include that in there. As far as a level of effort, if there are no others, we need to make sure that we do our due diligence and make sure that we are covered, and so we satisfy the requirement of the MSBA that it was looked into. Here are the reasons why there aren't alternate sites. But yes, we are required to. But as far as a level of effort, if there are no other sites within the district, then we just have to make sure that's documented sufficiently.
Kathy, maybe to expand on that, I asked Jim the same question. We clearly know as a town, we don't own a parcel that's not already developed that could even support a 20,000 square foot building, right? So it would require land acquisition. Not that there aren't pieces of land that you couldn't acquire, but do they make sense for a school? Just throwing it out there, right? And going back to Mark's comment about what if something is discovered as part of the due diligence related to the Neary site that doesn't make it a suitable site. While we have talked about Finn in some ways, right? That is a huge parcel, right? And we can't just forget about that exists. Not that that's where we think this should go, but again, it's at least a place that someone can diligence as part of this process to satisfy the MSBA, given the size of the parcel. The other thing I'll say is, when I was on the site walkthrough, which Jim, I assume a representative from Arrow Street was there that day when we did the walkthrough.
Yep.
The landfill was very clearly discussed and pointed to, when we were outside the building. So, again, I can't guarantee that someone wasn't distracted at that point, but there was a very clear discussion of it. Dale, did you figure out your microphone?
Can you hear me now?
You can.
No, I was gonna just recommend is if Mr. Davis could share the questions that you have, we can go through it and identify exactly what's part of the feasibility study. Just to remind everybody, MSBA is very strict on what we need to do for this study. The budget's the budget. It was established, I assume with the MSBA. So the dollars, we have to work within that. Typically the reimbursement coming back to the town is not replenished back into the study. So that 950 number is the number we have to work within. But I think it's easy enough, like the Board of Health, the wetlands, that's all part of the feasibility study. And we do have to follow their guidance, MSBA. I can tell you Arrow Street has done this as well as Skanska. So, I think it was just in the spirit of saving time here. If you could share that, we could sit down and just check, say, yes, this is part of the study. The groundwater being contaminated, that's something we would have to definitely look into. And then, so again, if that's something, I think you mentioned 3 pages, so we should definitely address it now. So once Arrow Streets, comes on board, we can, make sure everything's covered.
I think to quickly answer, if I can, a lot of the other things are details that I didn't see in there. And I guess I don't want to be I don't think we want to be in a situation where if it's not detailed in there, then it's something in the other category. So how do you suggest? I can go through the list, but I think you're going to tell me it's in there. I just didn't see it. So I'm just assuming that if I don't see it, then it goes into that other category. It's issues like the septic design. It's issues of studying the FEMA mapping and the floodplain zone, which we don't mention at all. And it's an analysis of a 50 and 100-year storm, which would have to do anyway.
Mhm.
But we need to determine, because that FEMA mapping floodplain zone is so darn close to the school, can we effectively build a school much closer to it? So that there's some basic engineering information that we're going to need, and I didn't see that in there. I think there's going to be a number of meetings with conservation on some of these issues. I wasn't aware that there are wetlands between the existing school and the bottom of the landfill. What's the extent of those wetlands? If it incorporates that field that's down there, then that site has a different shift. The other thing is some of them may seem like tiny issues, but they become big issues. Is there ever been an analysis done of the capacity or maintenance of the septic systems west of us, which are all uphill, which are all now becoming older houses? Is any of that stuff potentially draining in? I mean, basically, I look at Neary School as a bowl, the bottom of the bowl, and we've never looked at what's contained all around the edges that impact this site. And there were reasons we didn't do the work 30 years ago. This was the one school we didn't touch. We didn't have septic capacity. We didn't have the funding because we had other issues. But this is kind of the child we just never dealt with, and now the child is pretty old, and we need to deal with it. But
But Mark, I think sorry, just for 1 second.
Yep.
I think you're making the point of why we have to make sure this is the right site. And
No,
why the MSBA, when the
absolutely.
MSBA requires us to not just assume that we're building on that site, right? And that's,
Correct. And all I wanted to make sure, and if you assure me those kind of details are in there, they're just not spelled out, then I'm happy. But if I have to go through this proposal and I saw things that were missing, do I mention them and make sure they're in there, or are we going to be running down that battle later, where things have to be studied and they're just not here?
I mean, what I would say is that suitability of the site is definitely what we're doing within this feasibility study.
Okay.
And that is, just to put it very simply, if there are major issues with this site, to Jason's point, that's why we're looking at alternate sites. But I can say that that is a part of the feasibility study.
Okay.
100%.
That's all I needed to hear.
Kathy, then Denise.
So to continue on this train of thought, given what Mark has said, which has made me think about this again for the first time tonight, as far as that, I mean, I've just always assumed this is where it's going to be. You would think that I would think that you want to do this sooner than later, because if it's a site that's got issues in it, then you don't want to spend all this time looking at that site as far as the time spent to design, etc. If it ends up having issues. So is that the way it would work, Jim? The investigation that Mark has outlined would go first?
So we can definitely look at the timing, and I do agree with sooner than later. The process that we're going to go through, and we'll get into this when during the presentation, is that step one is developing the educational program, and then working through your options. So I think that can somewhat be in parallel if we understand that there are specific concerns on site. But the prescribed process that we go through that's required by the MSBA is to really define the educational needs first, and then walk through our options. We still have we have a year of feasibility to go through. Obviously, looking at that timeline of when we do this testing to inform those options will need to be moved up if it's a concern, which it obviously is. But yeah, we can definitely work through the timing on that. I can tell you it won't be the first thing out of the gate that we do. The visioning process really defines the direction that we go after that once we start to define the educational program. But it can definitely be moved up within that process.
I would think, to answer all of this, if you're doing educational visioning, right, that's a team, a very dedicated team, right, that specializes in that. That team is not going to be the same ones that's resolving Mark's concerns. I think the first step here, right, before we sound any alarm bells or we go down some detailed drilling or soil testing, et cetera, is having Arrow Street talk to the Board of Health and look at what's already done to maintain that site. Because candidly, the town of Southborough is continuing to invest in that from a recreational and I think a dog park, Kathy, perspective up there right now. It's obviously that particular area of the parcel is well outside the boundaries of the school, of where any potential footprint would go if it was on that site. But I understand, Mark, all your downstream kind of considerations. But I would think that whoever the right specialist is on the Arrow Street team could look at that, what has been done, what Board of Health has required, what DEP has required, to then inform and come back to the committee in a pretty quick manner of what things they would like to see done sooner rather than later. So we could potentially dual track, because yeah, the visioning is going to have to be done regardless of what site we need to do. But I think that helps us to kind of move and make sure we're making the right decisions and not focus on one site or try to open up other sites that we may not even own, then yeah, let's figure that out sooner rather than later. Go ahead, Denise. And Jim, I'm gonna have you take down your screen because I think
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
sorry.
So I guess you hear me now?
yes,
Can you hear me, Jason?
yes.
I guess my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, but all of these things that Mark is speaking about are all part of the feasibility of whether or not that parcel is going to work. And all of those things should be a component thereof, even if they haven't been enumerated. All of these questions have to be answered at the end of the feasibility study. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay, because I mean, we have to know at the end of the study whether or not we have problems with the water table, whether we have problems environmentally, whether we have septic issues. All of those things are all contained within the feasibility report, because once we get that done and it goes to the state, you need to then be in a position to go to town meeting and actually get to start this process. And you can't, those things can't be decided later. They have to be decided within the feasibility, correct, Jim?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I understood it. Okay,
Mhm.
thanks.
Go ahead, Mark.
I would also put septic on that same um, path, critical path. Because we know from the past there's a capacity issue down there. And B, I think the town needs to recognize that if we educationally go to the 600 profile, we're potentially looking at a treatment plant, potentially. But I think the septic is equally as critical. It's going to drive whether or not this site makes sense. And those are my two big items that we just need to look at.
Okay, Denise, is your hand still up, or you have something new? I think she's all set.
I that.
Okay. All right. So this would be the time where we would make a motion to approve the contract or not approve it. Or delay and further discuss. If we approve, then our next step would be we would invite Arrow Street in and let them make kind of a presentation of where they go next. If we aren't ready, then I would suggest we talk about another meeting date in the very near term. So I personally am ready to vote. I haven't heard anything tonight that would have changed kind of my opinion walking in. I think Mark has raised some tremendous comments. I know he's raised them even very early on in this process, but at the end of the day, I look to our owner's project manager and to the fact that Arrow Street has done this before, and they're not in it to win the feasibility study. They know they have to help us build support in the town, not only for the financial cost of this project, but that this is the right project, both educationally in the site, to bring this forward to a construction process. So I don't know where others sit, but when we are ready, there is a specific motion that we have to vote on, and I will read it, but I want to make sure we are ready for that motion before we do that.
But Jason, you use the word contract. We're actually voting on this proposal instead.
That's why I'm going to read specific. We're voting on the content of the 5 pages that was presented to us in our packet.
I would like, and Mark, again, we appreciate your comments. With the additions of the 2 things we said, which is adding the Board of Health, either in this or in that's going to be the contract, and also making sure it's clear we need to test the landfill. I think we should try to get this done tonight so we can keep moving here.
there anyone that disagrees with
I
Kathy's
agree.
comments? So Jim, procedurally, because the draft motion discussed the proposal dated, if I insert exactly what Kathy stated, and assuming Arrow Street doesn't have any objections to that, does that motion meet the standards that would be required for the town to sign the contract in the MSP, to meet the MSBA standards as well?
Yeah, that's fine. We can, yeah, basically just insert whatever's required within the proposal, and then the MSBA standard contract could be signed. So, yep.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that, Kathy. Proposal versus contract makes a difference, and proposal is in the language I'm going to read. All right, I'm going to make a motion. I'll have someone second it, and if there's objections or further discussions, we can discuss it during the discussion. So I'm going to move to approve Arrow Street Inc. fee for basic services scope in the amount of $596,000 as detailed in the proposal dated January 5th, 2024, adjusted for acknowledgement of involvement of the Board of Health and the landfill testing on site or adjacent to the property, and as authorized by the MSBA Designer Selection Panel vote on December 19th, 2023. Additionally, this vote is to authorize the town of Southborough to execute the MSBA Designer Service Base contract with Arrow Street Inc. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second.
All right, I got a second from Roger.
You can have.
Denise, did you say something? It cut out. If I didn't hear you, it did.
No, I both spoke almost at the same time, so I said he could have the second.
All right, got it. Okay, just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. Is there any discussion on the motion?
No.
Okay, we're gonna do a roll call vote. Chris?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Kathy?
I,
Roger?
Aye.
Denise?
Aye.
And I'm aye. Did I get everyone? All right, 7-0 vote
Yep.
on that. All right, thank you, Jim, Dale, and team for working through that. I know obviously the timing wasn't ideal with the holidays. And thank you, Mark, for raising your concerns. And I know we're all anxious to start working and getting answers to some of these questions. So with that, what I will do is I'm going to invite the Arrow Street team in and allow them to introduce themselves to us, and then make a brief presentation on where the process goes from here. I debated with Jim and Greg, like, I think the presentation may help some of the questions we just had answered, but I didn't think it was appropriate to have a presentation by Arrow Street if we weren't technically on board with their proposals. So there was a lot of different ways to do it, but I thank everyone for their patience through that process. And I imagine the Arrow Street team was very eager to probably chime in on certain points during that conversation. So with that, I am going to bring them all in here.
Excuse me, Jason.
Yes.
Jason, I'm gonna have to go to the APTO meeting.
Okay. Thank you,
the high
Denise.
school. Okay, bye-bye.
All right, Arrow Street team, I think I brought everyone in that I could. And welcome.
Thank you all. So I'm Larry Spang, and I was checking to see if it actually says that under my screen. So sometimes it gets confused. Good. So I see a thumb up. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we're pleased to be here virtually, I guess. We had actually thought about coming out to Southborough this evening, but I think given the weather, we're probably enjoying the fact that we're all sitting in our homes. But we did appreciate both the work done to date, the efforts that you guys went through to put out the RFP, and then the careful work with the Designer Selection Board and the MSBA. And we were thrilled a couple weeks ago to be selected by the MSBA, the DSP panel, and excited to get going with you guys. And I appreciate all the nuanced discussion. I really like that. And I'm making some notes to ourselves to, we can certainly add the Board of Health and the landfill issues to our proposal. So yeah, Mark, thank you for that. It is important for us, and I think either Jason or Jim mentioned, this part of the study is really to get you a project that the town can approve. And that's the MSBA's process. And so that's really our goal. So with that, so formerly Larry Spang, I am one of the partners at Arrow Street. We're about a 80-person firm. We've been doing schools for a while. If everyone has patience, we can show you some work, or we can defer to another time. And we'll just go around. We have a few folks from Arrow Street tonight. We sort of kept it simple. So why don't we start, Tina, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Yep. Tina Suhu. I'm an architect, and I am the project architect for this project.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Kate Bobrisky. I'm a principal at Arrow Street, and I'm the Director of Sustainability and Building Performance.
And then lastly, we have Mike Perillo, who's our educational planner programmer.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Perillo, educational planner with MLP Integrated Design. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. Welcome, all of you. What I thought about having us all go through introductions. I think what we'll do is we'll find the right time for you to get caught up on what each of our backgrounds are, what committees or boards we either represent or why we're on the board. But probably not the best use of our public meeting time. And really, I think want to get into some of the content. So I don't know if Arrow Street's presenting or Skanska is presenting and how you all want to run this, but you tell me, and the floor will then be yours.
Yeah, so I think, just introductions. And Larry, maybe just in the interest of time, we'll jump just to the process slides, if that's okay. Yeah. So do you want me to share? I already have.
If you have them handy, you want to do it?
Sure.
That's fine.
Okay. All right. So I'll just give a brief overview. The MSBA process is divided in modules. As we've discussed, we're entering into the feasibility study. So that is basically two main sections, Module 3A, which is, and each one of these, and when I jump to the next slide, I'll show the dates. These are submissions that we have to send to the MSBA. They review them and then vote them at their board meetings. So Module 3A, the preliminary design program, that's where we send in to the MSBA our options that the feasibility study has come out with after the prescribed process that Larry will run through in a bit more detail. Once those are submitted, approved, we go back and we go into Module 3B, which is the preferred schematic, which is where we select an option to go forward into schematic design, into a bit more detailed design. So as it lays out right now, January to May, we're looking at existing conditions, educational visioning, site options and evaluations, which speaks to that previous conversation we had, development of preliminary options. And as we go through that, we're developing the options, reviewing the building systems, looking at the budget. So that's, May through August. September to October of this year would be we have to meet with the MSBA's facility assessment subcommittee and then MSBA reviews. So that is basically the preliminary design program and then submitting the preferred schematic. So that would mean basically a MSBA approval of October of this year. So that's just the feasibility study itself. And like I said, I'll hand it over to Larry here to run through in a bit more detail. And we can run through schematic design, but that's another submission to the MSBA in a bit more detail. So that's the broad brush view of everything. Any questions on the overall process? Okay.
Keep going.
All right. Oh, and I can speak to this real quick. This is their slide, but we just finished designer selection going into module 3, and then this goes all the way through closeout. So I'll turn over to you, Larry.
Yeah, I guess so. And, we can go as long or as short as it makes sense. This is the overall project schedule as we had understood it coming out of the RFS, request for services that the MSBA and the town put out. But as you're mentioning, more or less going through about a year and a quarter, about 15 months worth of feasibility and schematic design, ending if things go well and everything is on track, sometime at the end of Q1 of next year, 2025, you would be looking for local project funding authorization. And just to put a point on that, this can go at your pace. This is a pretty reasonable schedule, but for various reasons, you may decide to take a little longer or a little shorter on certain pieces of it. There is a cap on the amount of time that you have to work through with the MSBA if you do decide you need more time, but you shouldn't feel rushed, and I don't think that's their intent either. They just want to make sure things are moving along. Assuming the project is funded, then we would jump into design development and construction documents, putting together the plans and the bid documents for the project. Generally speaking, the goal of construction starting sometime in late spring of 2026, essentially 2 years and change from now. And then this assumes a sort of 2-year construction process. That can vary a lot depending on the scope of the project. If it were a very in-depth phasing project, it might take longer. If it were a simple, more straightforward thing, it might take a little less. But that goal is to then say, okay, your school is opening. We always say August because that's when you want to move kids, but really you're aiming for something like June to allow the district to move in, the teachers to get it set up and get used to the building before moving in. So that's the overall process. And we thought we might talk a little bit about the educational programming. Mike can give you a little sense of that. So why don't you go ahead, Mike, and talk through that. I guess it's an important part. The MSBA wants the educational needs of the district to drive the design. And so their process is very clear about setting up and understanding exactly how you want to teach at the Neary school or the enlarged Neary school, whatever we end up with. And that's reflected in the project design, whether it's a renovation, addition, new construction, etc. So there you go.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. I've mentioned in the interview, and I'll mention again tonight, I'm an educational planner, but my background started in education. I was a teacher for over 20 years, mostly in Newburyport. And so you're going to find that my process, this integrated process that we're going to go through with the district, is really educationally based. So we're going to look at 4 major key components of education. We're going to look at them individually, and then we're going to look at them and how they intersect. So starting with the learner, we'll look at child development. We'll look at physical, academic, social, emotional traits and needs of all the students at the elementary level. And then we'll make our way around this molecule to build this educational vision. So then we'll focus on curriculum and instruction. We'll think about ways students learn best, how learners are empowered. We'll build visions and definitions of learning and think about practices and procedures that might already be in place, or maybe we bring to the table to really balance engaging academics and social emotional practices. And then finally, those 3 components will really help to shape and inform what the learning environment needs to be to support all of that. And so together, those 4 components will build really this educational vision and the educational program that will define the project. So how do we get there? So this chart, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's really an overview of the educational visioning process. So hopefully we'll start in the next few weeks with a kickoff meeting where we'll finalize the visioning plan, we'll build the schedule, and then we'll talk about the different stakeholder groups that we want to bring to the table at different times to really get this broad, but also specific perspective. And then each session after that, each activity really brings us from this 50,000-foot view to a really specific, refined educational vision. So we'll start with observation and immersion, where we go and tour Precedent schools. We actually also go and spend the day at Neary to really see what's currently happening, what we might want to improve on or support or add, or preserve, things like that. And then there's those visioning sessions that relate to the things I just talked about in that molecule a second ago. So starting again with the learner, and then teaching and learning, and then focusing on the learning environment. And so all of that really brings us to about the end of February, early March, with each component really building off one another and engaging different stakeholder groups along the way.
Mike, can I just ask you a quick question on that? You
Absolutely.
mentioned you mentioned spending time at Neary. Given the scope of this, in that Woodward is grades 2 and 3, would that be part of it too?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was going so quickly, I forgot. So because this project involves different enrollment scenarios, the conversation about enrollment scenarios will come up during really each visioning session. So when we talk about the learner profile, we'll talk about the different enrollment scenarios, and because you have different developmental stages within those different scenarios, how that impacts one another. We then also go and look at Woodward, and we look at Neary, and we look at the different needs. And, we may go to a different school as well. Sometimes in these projects, districts decide that they might want to bring a certain special education program into the new building from a completely different school, just so that way we can build something that really supports those needs of that particular population. So we might go and also observe that as part of the process as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that reminder.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we want to pause, is anybody else have questions on the ed part?
Seeing no hands raised.
Okay. Yeah, and we're happy to take questions as we go here. And then the other piece that which you guys were all over, and Mark Davis in particular, I think brought up a lot of good points. The site and the building assessment is key components to this. We certainly want to understand the traffic and logistics issues of the 3 sites, the Finn School, the Woodward School, and the Neary School. We do have a traffic engineer who's part of our team, who will be coming out. He actually has worked in Southborough a number of times, and mentioned to us his daughter played soccer at Neary for a number of years. So he's quite familiar with the area, and we'll be looking at that from the traffic standpoint, particularly as we talk about consolidation, if one of these schools is consolidated into the other 2 locations. We certainly want to look at the 3 buildings we have in front of us to see what those are about, how they're performing as buildings, what the systems are like, so that we can understand, in the case of the Neary School, if you were to try and renovate or add to the building, what would be required for that. And so that's one of the options. The MSBA requires several different options, one of which is a repair option called the base repair. If you were to do nothing but fix everything, here's what it would cost. And then there's a series of options we have to explore, in this case enrollments, but also is it an adult or is it new construction? We have taken a look quickly as part of our interview preparation. These are the existing spaces, some of which are pretty close to MSBA standards, the ones in red. Sorry, the ones in green. The ones in yellow are close, and the ones in red are further away from MSBA standards. And that just gives you a sense that in this particular building, a lot of the current facility does not meet their standards. Doesn't mean they might not approve it if we were to go ahead and try and use them, but it's something we pay attention to. The site, as you mentioned, has a lot of interesting complications, I guess is the best way to say it. And if we look at the next slide, you can see we looked very quickly, and I could pull up, we have a firm that is one of our consultant teams who will be working with us to understand issues like wetlands, where the drainage is going, what's the issue with the landfill at the existing athletic. There isn't, despite all the room that's there, there's not a lot of space. So helping to identify that, and Mark Davis, I had the same reaction when I was looking at the site, is I'm sitting in the middle of a bowl and everything wants to drain right down on top of us. So we're going to have to pay attention to that as we talk through this very carefully. We did throw out some ideas for how you might add to the building or do some renovations. We usually just put those in a drawer and we don't see them again, although sometimes we take them out years later and look and laugh at the stuff we have. But this was really just to warm ourselves up. One thing we talked about in our interview, and I think Kate is a good person to talk this through, is currently there's a lot of incentives out there from the government for net zero. And we know that was an important consideration of the district. So Kate, you want to walk folks through this?
Yeah, I mean, I won't spend too much time on this, but we looked at, this was specifically to the 450 enrollment, and just looked at if this was a new construction building, what would the cost be for the different types of all electric systems. And a net zero building is all electric systems, which you're basically going to be required to do for code. But the great news is there's a lot of incentives that you can go after for different systems. And this has traditionally changed. We've done several net zero buildings, including schools, and the incentives are just growing and growing. So we'll walk you through this as we start to get into more details. A lot of this comes more in the schematic design phase, but we'll talk about construction costs. We'll talk about operation and maintenance costs and saving and revenue streams. And we'll also talk about incentives as we go through, as the mechanical system is a big cost in terms of construction and operations. And so it's a important decision. And so we'll go through that and present you all the different components to first cost and operations.
And then lastly, an important thing for this group, the school building committee, to give us input on is, how do you see the community engagement going? And I appreciated the comment someone made about the number of meetings. And I know for a community like Southborough, there's likely to be more than less. And so we're willing to support the meetings that are needed. We had this diagram from our interview. It really is a series of questions that come up in people's minds. What happens when you talk about consolidating schools from what they're used to today? We've done a couple of things to try and work that through in the past, and you can give this some thought and we can start thinking about how we talk to the community. You go to the next slide. There's a lot of different tools, couple of shots here from work that we did in the town of Harvard for the Hildreth Elementary School. All different ways to bring the information to people in the way that they can absorb it and help to make those decisions. And as Mike mentioned in the next slide, we had some taking people on tours of buildings can be really helpful. So not only are you establishing a vocabulary for talking about the different types of spaces, but people get an understanding of why today's building is going to be quite a bit different than what was built years ago and is currently being operated. So that can be very helpful. We also tend to run a sustainable design engagement to really try to get a good sense from the community, what's important to everyone for sustainable aspects of the building. And then all of that comes together in a way that comes together in the project. So this was the boardwalk that crosses the wetlands that we did out in Acton with the Skanska team. And we're happy to keep working with you guys with Skanska to talk about the Neary site.
Kathy, go ahead.
So thank you for that presentation. That was really helpful. But my overarching question is this. It sounds to me like in the end, there's going to be 6 different permutations of what could be done here. 3 with the existing Neary being renovated either as it is, slightly expanded with 1 more grade, more expanded with 2 grades, or a whole new Neary with current grades, a whole new Neary with 1 more grade, and a whole new Neary with 2 grades. Is that right?
That's likely. Let's see, for
So give
Acton, we
6
did,
numbers.
yeah, for Acton, we did 19 schemes. We're currently working in Quincy, and I think we're up to 12 or 15.
Okay, with those 12 and 15, 19, you actually have numbers for each one of those as far as the cost?
Depending on where we are in the project, we often do, but sometimes some of the schemes get peeled off pretty quickly, so we're not developing costs for each of those.
Okay, so this is my main question. So
Yep.
once you develop the, let's say we're right, it's 6 choices, right? Then the decision as to what to go forward with of those 6 is made by whom?
By the school building committee.
Okay, but do you recommend one of those 6s? Or you just say, here they are, let us know what you want to do?
Let's see, we won't tell you which one to do. We often have a recommendation. I think what happens in the process is you reach a joint conclusion that says this is the best scheme. And then sometimes
it's a vote of this committee that will determine what we
Yes.
want to. So it's not it's not MSBA.
Correct.
It's this committee. And then, because I was always confused, Jason, whether we're going for a town with, 2 choices or 3 choices. So we're going to go for a 2-town meeting when this is ready for prime time, ready to build, assuming we get that far, with 1 recommendation.
That has already been approved by the MSBA. Keep me honest on that.
Yes, yeah,
MSBA
so
have to approve our plan before we can go seek funding.
yeah, so that's the preferred schematic report. We have to submit that to the MSBA with reasoning why the district is going with that option. They have an opportunity to review it, ask questions, but yes, then going forward, that is the preferred option.
Do they override you ever, Jim, and say, we just don't agree? Like, for the designer, we had ranked things a little bit different within our 3 group. Do they override that decision ever or say, we won't fund it if you do that?
They can ask questions, but in my experience, no, they haven't pushed back and said you cannot do that option. That is why you have to develop it with solid reasoning for all of the options for when you submit it. And obviously that's what ourselves and Arrow Street will do and help this group do to really make sure that the reasoning is sound. And that's the process of the feasibility study.
Yeah, I would just add to that. They're supportive of the thorough due diligence process in a way that then presents it to the community in a way that can be supported. And that's their goal. I have not heard of an example of them derailing a scheme once it's gotten that far. You may get some input from them as we go. But oftentimes it's more about process. Are you studying things carefully enough and deeply enough, whether it's various options, whether it's the existing building, whether you're presenting to the community, and they really want to be sure the process is solid and airtight so that people can support the project.
If we end up with an option that builds a new school where you showed it on one of the slides, are you assuming we're tearing down the old school?
I would assume yes, but it's sort of an interesting question. Are you thinking of using it for something else?
Possibly, but I didn't know if you need that land as far as fields, whatever. So that's why I'm asking, does it have to be torn down?
Yeah, well, typically that's often what happens. If you build on the land you have, the fields and the playgrounds and the parking lot, then you tear it down and you replace that. And that's often the case when you go for new construction. But, you know, there's lots of opportunity to look at other options.
I think the field question is going to be very important there, Kathy, depending on what we are or aren't doing with Finn. Because I think what we've heard from recreation is they need more fields, so they can't afford to lose one. But I don't think the location of fields, other than for what the school needs on site for their own programming, matters as much to the town needs. But I'll go to Roger next.
Just to be clear, so we go to MSBA with our final recommendation, a single final recommendation. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
So I had one question kind of based on the presentation, and it may feed into what the communications subcommittee in particular needs to start thinking about is, I think we approved the feasibility funding for this project almost 2 years ago at this point. Many people, I think, forget we even approved the money, to be completely honest with you. Even those that are parents of school-age children. The superintendent has done a great job of communicating both the faculty in the district. Obviously, we're impacting 3 potential schools when you cut down to this, even though we're not really talking about K and 1 as part of this right now, and also the parents within the community. Would you consider this kind of, and this is a joint question for OPM team and the design team, this is kind of that wake up moment to the community that like this is like it's game time, and there's gonna be a lot going on here now that people need to start focusing and paying attention to, right? Like kind of going back to Andrew's question about the community forums, right? Like, is that something that you can see, and it appears this way, but keep me honest, based particularly on what Mike presented, like there's going to be a lot of opportunity for interaction here over the next 2 to 3 months, both with the district faculty, but also the community members at large to start to understand where this is trending.
Yeah, definitely. And, as far as the visioning portion of that, I can have Larry speak to that. But having the community involved as early as possible is instrumental in a successful vote, because they've been walked along through the process as we walk through options, understand what's been looked at, what hasn't been looked at, and ultimately a community that has felt like they've been engaged and a part of the process is more apt to vote for a project at the end. So definitely, this is definitely the time going through the visioning process. This is definitely the kickoff of that process of really getting good, solid community engagement. So Larry, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think listening to them early and often is the mantra. We often try to go and listen to folks before we show them any schemes. Because oftentimes when you show a scheme, they think you've already landed on a scheme and you don't want their input. And so we often say that, start with a blank slate, listen to what folks have to say, and they may find that they have some quite different round of concerns than what we as designers are thinking of. And so we're happy to support that.
And it's
Go ahead.
not just educators.
Oh,
sitting-
sorry, go ahead, Mike. No, go ahead, Andrew.
No,
Go ahead, Mike.
sorry. I was just going to add that, in envisioning sessions, when I talk about stakeholders, one of the things we'll talk about in the kickoff meeting is it's people sitting at the table, but it's not just educators, actually, even though it's called educational visioning, it's kind of deceiving. Really, it's educators sitting next to community members, coaches, local business members, parents, students themselves, to create a really cohesive but broad perspective, which is a huge part of the community engagement.
Thank you. Go ahead, Andrew.
So I think, I'm not sure who this question's for, but maybe it would have been something we could talk about with the proposal. But as part of our journey along this, the information gathering and things like that, is there a marketing or kind of communication portion of this feasibility study? I'm thinking along the lines of like, when we do a tour of the school, are we taking video so that we can help, so when we get to the end of this process, we have documentation and imagery and things that we can use to sell to town meeting and the public in terms of our process, as opposed to just us going through it, making a decision, providing a report. But I'm thinking almost like we put together, I know we're gonna have a website with some information, but even more like, tour video of the tour of this is current conditions, I don't know, some more visuals and things like that. So it's a little bit more user friendly than just kind of like the end report.
Yeah, I mean, I know I made this distinction before, but the feasibility study cannot have anything to do with the campaign for a vote for yes. I just want to make sure that I think I understand what you're saying, but I just want to make sure that that distinction is clear. The website, any information that we do can only support the feasibility study process, schematic design process. We cannot have any marketing material that is just moved over and used for the vote. That's a campaign finance state law. There has to be a separation of those two. But what I will say, the website, anything that we use, it has all of that is, if it's easy, can be navigated very easily. It supports that process because they can show all the steps that we were taken to ultimately get to the vote, so that they can understand that it is a thoughtful process. So I 100%.
Yeah. I understand the marketing part. That wasn't probably the right word, but more of marketing in terms of our process. Like,
yes,
we took a tour. Here is us taking the tour. This is the condition of the tour. This is what we saw with our own eyes, so you could see what we saw, right? And
Yep.
some of that kind of aspect.
Yeah, and that's all a function of the website, that as much information as we can put up on the website as far as process and everything that we went through during the feasibility study, it definitely 100% helps that discussion.
Any other questions for tonight for the Arrow Street team? So I did talk to Jim about what our proper cadence is moving forward in terms of meeting schedule. We're thinking, at least for now, it's going to still be monthly. There may, and there will still be required meetings of certain subcommittees. I think, Roger, the good news is at our next meeting, we're going to dissolve your subcommittee, the designer selection subcommittee. I know you may shed a tear or two, but I think communication.
Can I second that? I think my other two members would agree.
Motion tonight, that'll be on the next agenda. But I think finance obviously is going to have to continue to meet at least monthly, and then communications obviously is going to need to ramp up based on the conversation we just had. But I do think in the interim, while we try to set a meeting date, I think we're going to try to anchor towards Mondays as best as possible, but also realizing we're in budget season, and especially our select board, finance committee, and school representatives are likely in nightly meetings around various different topics until, just for the Skanska and Arrow Street team, we have a March town meeting in Southborough, so we are on the very early side. So we're in that prime season right now where, unfortunately, Zoom allows some, especially our employees, to get home as opposed to staying live for meeting. But we will find the right opportunity for live meetings when the time comes. But in the meantime, I am going to work with Jim. He has a contact with the state to do that campaign finance discussion for us now. So we just need to align on a few dates. So even though I said we're going to meet monthly, I am going to try to schedule that between now and then. That way we have no foot faults from the beginning. And have that. I think you said there was a gentleman from the state come in and just do whatever their normal presentation is for the committee.
Yeah, basically it's a fairly brief presentation walking through all the rules and regulations. But it is a representative from the state.
Okay. So that makes sense in terms of where we're headed. Committee will obviously vet the dates and try our best as possible to make it so as many people as possible can attend. But we will be going to a bi-month, twice monthly, I guess, meeting schedule at some point. I just think the question is when. We don't know that yet. With that said, I'm gonna go to item 6 on our agenda. Arrow Street and Skanska team are welcome to stay. We're just gonna do our quick subcommittee updates. I don't think this is gonna be more than a few minutes. And then we're gonna adjourn. So with that, Roger, you've been the star of the show tonight through the designer selection. Is there anything else you think there needs to be commented on there? Then you probably need to wrap up some minutes.
No, I don't think that there's anything that I need to say about what we've done so far. You're sort of seeing the result of it tonight. We do need to wrap up some minutes somehow. And I'm not sure when we do that, but the last two meetings of minutes, we do need to approve at some point in time. So I don't know whether that would be, I don't think we need a separate meeting for that, do we, Jason? Isn't that?
I'll coordinate with you offline. If you give 2 options, you can call a separate meeting, or I can add it to a future agenda in post specifically for your subcommittee. And you can we'll give you 2 minutes at the start of the meeting to take care of your business and then dissolve you.
Unless I hear objection from either of the other 2 committee members, I think that would be the preferable approach.
Okay. I'll coordinate that then for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Finance Committee, Kathy.
So, we don't have a whole lot to do right now. We've met twice. We're going to meet this Thursday to approve Skanska's November and December invoices. That's all we have so far. So they've been pretty brief. I do have on this week's agenda though to start talking about when and how to develop a financial model, so we can have something to start looking at as far as members go. Because as we all know, it is surprising to me how this has not bubbled up in this town. I've talked about it a lot, and Jason's talked about it live. Andrew's talked about it a lot, and I just kind of seem like I met with blank stares when we talked about this is a really expensive project, and this is coming, and we might close the school and whatever. So I do hope that this next round that we do start seeing more interest from stakeholders, because I think once they do focus on interest. But anyway, the finance committee's got a very finite task at the moment. So we meet this Thursday to approve 2 more invoices for Jim.
Okay, and that's a perfect leading to communications subcommittee. We haven't met since we have had some interim meetings, but nothing of significant substance other than the release that went out to the community in December timeframe. I am going to call a meeting very shortly to discuss how we re-engage, similar to the comment I kind of asked to the team about 15 minutes ago. And we also have been able to secure a quote for a website. So we're going to talk through how to get that mobilized as well. So that will be forthcoming to those that are on that subcommittee very soon. All right, I'm going to go to public comment. We have absolutely no members of the public here, so I'm going to keep going. We already talked about meeting schedule. Are there any other are there any other business that anyone wants to conduct tonight related to Neary building? I'm seeing none. I will make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, do a roll call vote. Chris?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Did I get everyone other than myself?
Roger.
Roger, I missed
Aye.
you. Roger, and I knew my math was off. And I'm aye. So that's all 7. So have a good evening, everyone. Thank you all.
It's not Denise, it's all
joining.
6, Jason. Denise is
Thank
gone.
you. Nice to meet
That's
you,
why my
Arrow
math was-
Street.
Thank
Right.
you. 6-0. See ya.
Thank-
Thanks all.